Oh my God, honey, I had no idea I hit you so hard. How bad is it? 7 stitches, Julie. What did you expect when you hit me in the back of the head with that heavy lamp? You could have killed me. If I expected Julie to show remorse, I was disappointed. She stared at me, chin upturned, with defiance in her eyes. Well, what did you expect me to do when I came home early and found you in our bed? Our bed, having sex with this woman? I forced myself to look into the eyes of the woman I had so cruelly betrayed. Her eyes reflected a multitude of emotions. I saw defiance, anger, shock, and confusion all vying for dominance on one face. The defiance disappeared briefly, and a tear rolled down the cheeks of the woman I had loved more than my own life for 15 years. I felt I must be silent before her, and gathered my courage to face her justified anger. Who was that? Karen? What? Your new secretary? The one you told me about less than a month ago that she was, and I quote, ordinary? I didn't deny that I lied to my wife. I lied through gritted teeth. My gaze returned to the wooden surface between us. The huskiness in her voice at the next words made it clear that Julie was holding back sobs. How old is she? She turned 28 yesterday. Do you know when her birthday is? There was obvious shock and pain in her voice, and I chose to remain silent. There was no point in making her feel worse. Oh my God, so what had I witnessed? A 39-year-old man giving a birthday present to a psychotic bitch with daddy issues? Once again, I chose to remain silent. What was the point of telling her that Karen had discreetly but persistently started stalking her boss, me, shortly after she was hired? Ever since my faithful old secretary June had retired 6 months ago. It was June who interviewed and eventually recommended Karen. Her flirting was so subtle that naive old me didn't even notice a thing. A couple weeks ago, Karen brought it to my attention so I could finally see all the episodes and moments from a new perspective. How long has this been going on? This was the first time, Julie, honestly. Julie looked me over critically. I answered her with a hard stare, unafraid of being caught in a lie. Yesterday was the first time Karen and I physically crossed the line. How unlucky were Karen and I? We had just stripped and were rubbing against each other as awkwardly as only two people, nervous and unfamiliar with each other's bodies, can, when I heard my wife's hurt squeal just before the lights went out. Just then I was in Julie and I's marital bed, and the next moment I was in an uncomfortable hospital bed with anything but what you call a terrible headache. Julie's eyes searched my eyes for the truth. I did her the courtesy of holding eye contact until she was satisfied. I noticed the moment when she recognized I was being honest, when the anger quickly disappeared to be replaced by what? Insecurity? A feeling that must be almost automatic in every cheating spouse. Just one moment you thought you knew your spouse, your world, and to some extent your future. The next moment the ground is knocked out from under your feet and nothing is as you thought it would be. The word quicksand comes to mind. Anything but solid ground, more like a whole pile of crap that you fall through and sink into. Immediately questions arise. What did I do wrong? How inadequate was I? Where did I go wrong? These feelings must have been crushing her, and I was the cause of it. The questions tormenting her are also my fault. I let her have the conversation, later followed by the apology I thought I should have given her. I know I've been bitchy for months, Steve, sullen and aloof with you and the kids, but it was because of the impending promotion at work. You knew that. Oh, I knew it all too well. Julie and 3 of her co-workers were battling each other, competing for one job opening, a significant promotion. The other 3 were unmarried and had no children. Julie explained that in her new position, work hours would not be as regular as in her current position. She could be expected to stay for half an hour or until midnight when the need to meet a deadline arose. She wanted to impress the manager and show him that being a wife and mother would not interfere, although I pointed out that it would. Stubborn Julie, of course, could not accept this. Instead, she went head over heels in impressing her boss, despite the damage it was doing to her relationship with me and her children. The new norm for Julie was now to stay at work for an hour or two, pile into the house to eat whatever I had prepared, and then retire to the office to do homework until the kids went to bed. Heck, quite often I'd fall asleep before she finished. On Saturdays, Julie was often either off to the office or working from home, which meant she needed a break every Sunday and was as grumpy as a cat that sat on a wire brush. If all 4 hopeful applicants worked as hard as Julie did, the boss got a lot of work done for free. I know I've neglected you and the kids, Steve. I know that, aside from a few quick hookups when you pissed me off, we weren't, close for a while, but that was going to end soon. You knew that. The promotion will be announced at the end of the month. If I get the position, I'll only have to come back to work a couple times a week and go on trips every now and then. If I don't get it, I'll tell Mark where he can shove his fucking job. Given your thriving business, I can afford to spend my time looking for something else. There was silence again, and we stared at each other for a moment that seemed to last for hours rather than seconds. All the while, Julie clutched both my hands in hers. After breaking eye contact, she looked over my shoulder and let go of my hands as if they had burned her, and quickly put hers back in her lap under the table. I was briefly distracted by my throbbing headache and unconsciously reached out and felt the bandage on my head. I simultaneously wished it was wound tighter and looser, anything to ease the pain. Had I been so inconsiderate that I'd pushed you into the arms of another? I didn't say anything. I had already tried and failed to align my recent behavior with the belief system I had held since I was old enough to make my own judgments. There is no excuse for betraying those who deserve your trust. Julie's thoughts and emotions were obviously running back and forth, if her facial expression was to be believed. She was a woman who had been betrayed with all the pain, insecurity, and anger that inevitably follows. There was silence between us. Do you have any idea how I feel, Steve? To come home early, to what was supposed to be a safe haven in my home, into the comforting arms of my husband, to find him in my bed with his fucking secretary? I mean, he's too stingy to shell out for a cheap motel room and too insensitive to screw a whore in some other room in the house. You should have destroyed our sanctuary with your disgusting behavior, your treachery. You know I'll never sleep in that bed again, don't you? I just kept my expression neutral and lowered my eyes. I realized that tears were spurting from Julie's eyes again by her sobbing and the roughness of her voice. It's not fair, Steve. How can I compete with her? I saw that her breasts were bigger than mine. You always told me mine were fine. Remember what you always told me when we were newlyweds? That more than what fits in your hand is excessive? You lied? You wanted to hold some other man's fours? Or was it her firm little tummy? Yeah, I saw it too when she jumped off the bed so I wouldn't hit you with the lamp again. What was that shit she used to pin me down while she was calling the police? I was going to say Krav Maga, a mix of boxing, martial arts, and street fighting developed by the Israeli Defense Forces. Karen is an expert. It's the same fighting technique Matt Damon uses in all the Jason Bourne movies. That's why she wasn't afraid of you after you knocked me out. But Julie was on a roll. Yeah, fit and slim, not like me, right? I got a soft belly after carrying your babies. You're fucking kids, Steve. I know I've put on a little weight lately. I haven't been eating right and I'm too tired to go to the gym. I'll fix all that when this is all over. Julia stopped, breathing heavily. I pondered whether I should defend myself at this point. Should I tell her that she had interrupted Karen and me before I cheated on her, so to speak? I decided against it. We were both naked, and the intent was certainly as good or bad as the action, according to my thinking. I decided to let Julie vent her anger until she was done. Perhaps it would be some comfort to her to know that she was wrong. Nothing she had mentioned about her looks compared to Karen's had influenced my decision to sleep with Karen, although she was right. Interfering with my defense was what Julie must have heard just before she caught us saying, "God, Karen, you're so beautiful." Julie must have read my mind. "You've often said that to me," she said as her unfocused eyes looked back 15 years. She quickly focused again, and Julie's determination returned. "This relationship, our relationship, is now unbalanced. You have no idea what the shit I saw yesterday does to a person. How soul-crushing and ego-destroying it is. How it hurts. It's worse than being stabbed. Until you feel exactly what I feel, our relationship isn't going anywhere. So here's what's gonna happen. I'm gonna pick up some young stud and have him in our bed. I don't care who it is, just like I don't care if he's younger than you, slimmer than you, and able to last longer. And you know what? You're going to sit there damn still and watch him, pressing me into our mattress. I'm going to keep doing it until I decide that you've experienced exactly the same pain as I have. If you don't agree to this, I'll file for divorce and take everything you own, and maybe you'll be lucky enough to see your precious children for a couple days every other week. How does it feel to be attacked by someone you love, asshole?" She stopped, breathing heavily. The stroppy woman my loving wife had turned into over the past few months had indeed returned. Saliva flew as her fear and insecurity turned to rage. Realizing that in her anger she was abandoning morality with her unilateral decisions, she forced herself to calm down again. "I can't believe you made our bed like that, Steve. What say after I get my revenge, when you really realize how devastated I am, we go out and buy a new mattress, huh?" This time she clearly wanted me to contribute to the conversation. I contemplated whether to start by saying, "Yes, I know what it's like to be attacked by someone you love, and I have the stitches to back it up." But that was too cheap. It left me with so many possibilities. "Where were you going to screw Mark, Julie?" My wife's hands quickly hit the bottom edge of the table in an attempt to reach her chin before it hit the tabletop. What? It's not a hard question, Julie. Your boss, Mark. The man who was right behind you when you walked into our bedroom last night. Where were you going to fuck him this time? In our bed like you usually do? Tell me, whose idea was it? His? Did he enjoy the thought of sleeping with you in the bed we shared? Or was it you? Was it your idea to humiliate me? To know that I slept on the bed you defiled with another man? Julie's mouth opened and closed like a guppy fish on steroids. You don't need to show me what it's like to witness someone you loved and trusted for years stab you in the back. That moment came for me when I left work early one day when I felt sick. You should be able to remember the exact date, except you were too focused on getting that promotion. What was your logic, Julie? I may not have all the natural advantages of my competitors, but I can show him that this mature woman can give him something they can't. And before you ask, yes, I know what it's like to see your partner with someone younger, fitter, and from what you said that I overheard when I got to the bedroom, what was it? Oh yeah, you're better than my hubby. I'm assuming he's, more blessed than I am. Now it was my turn to stop and breathe heavily. The anger, burning and red-hot to the core. What I felt that day, and while reviewing the notes that followed, still hadn't cooled. It didn't take long to rekindle the flames of rage. At least the anger masked the pain. The slightest thought of Julie's betrayal was like sprinkling salt on an open wound. Damn it, feel it. Karen's reaction when I confided in her in a moment of pain was outrage. When I then showed her the tapes, her reaction was much the same as mine. I was touched that she was angry and offended with me. The fact that she was glad that she was finally able to admit her interest in developing a relationship with me was extremely soothing to my ego. When did you get so stupid, Julie? You don't think the girls in your office saw what you were doing? Hell, Julie. 2 of the other applicants that I know of have also been in Mark's bed in the last 6 weeks. His wife can now get footage of the 3 of you at any time. For the record, Karen and I were close enough just yesterday to teach you a little lesson, but I'm sure we'll change that as soon as we can. She's home now, getting to know Jen and Lauren. They were getting along great when I left. They've been lacking female attention since you pulled away so emotionally. Karen wants kids, they want an interested mother. Sounds like a win-win to me. I could see Julie's eyes practically spinning from everything I was saying. The sight was not a pleasant one. For old memory, I waited and said nothing. But Steve, I did it just for us. This promotion brings in an extra $20,000 a year. Think what it could do for us. I don't have to think, Julie. I've seen what it does for us. It made you a Megillah who was hard to live with and turned you into a whore, and it destroyed our home. With the first confirmation that her decisions threatened her family, Julie's hands snaked out from under the table and reached for mine, squeezing them tightly. The guard who monitored visitors in the holding cells walked over and spoke loudly. "No physical contact. I let you get away with it once, Mrs. Brown. Don't push your luck. Remove your hands or you will be returned to your cell immediately." Julie looked down at her orange jumpsuit as if she had just remembered where she was. She looked at me pleadingly. "Get me out of here, please, Steve." "What? And not give Karen a chance to meet our kids? But I'm your wife, Steve. You have to forgive me. Take me back." "Why, Julie? Why take back someone I'll never trust again?" Why give my children to someone who jeopardizes their emotional well-being over a little thing like money? Then fuck you, Steve. When I get out, I'll make sure you and your whore never see my kids again. I smiled and shook my head sadly. Now that that was okay with her, they were her children. Oh, Julie, wake up and smell the dog shit. Unless you find some other idiot to bail you out, you're staying here until your trial. Then, according to my lawyer, the assault will almost certainly be followed by a prison sentence. You won't get the full 7 years under the statute, but even probation will mean no child custody. I watched the horror of the woman I once loved, realizing that instead of being here to bail her out and explain to the jailers that this was all a mistake, it was in my best interest to press charges, using Karen as a witness to keep her here. Here, which put her at the end of the line for money and lawyers, not to mention any post-divorce benefits. The sight was not a pleasant one. Gone was the arrogance based on the assumption that she would soon be out to subject me to suffering as a cuckold. In its place was the sudden realization that she should have used the time she spent threatening to humiliate me to beg me to bail her out. Suddenly she looked really, really bad. Should I tell her that what she witnessed between Karen and me was just a setup to provoke her? That my one slip-up with Karen won't happen again? That I'll follow my moral code, at least until we're legally separated? Should I tell her that courts rarely sentence assault these days, especially if the fit of rage was provoked, as in her case? Hell no! Let her fear of being locked up with a bunch of lesbians be part of her punishment. After all, she committed 2 of the worst crimes in my law book, destroyed something beautiful between us, and jeopardized the emotional well-being of our children, damage I've sought to minimize by spending almost all of my efforts on it. Come on, Julie. Accept that you gambled and lost. Now you're getting a divorce. Accept that you screwed up willingly, and maybe when you get out, the girls will still want to have something to do with you. Get in the fight, and I'm pretty sure you'll lose them forever. In fact, I'll make sure of it. Goodbye, Julie. I loved you once upon a time. With those words, Steve stood up and walked to the barred door to the visitor's room. The guard let him out, and without looking back, he headed to his car, smiling at the thought of the 3 beautiful girls waiting for him at home. Stepping out of the holding cell, Steve hurried to the car he'd arrived in, its driver lying on the hood, enjoying the late morning rays. Hey, wake up! How'd it go for you? About as well as you predicted. Threats. Thought she had the moral high ground, blah, blah, blah. Well, now she knows where she stands with me. You know, all in all, it was very soothing, just like you said. Thank you, brother. What big brothers are for? Thanks anyway, Dave. Stephanie had guilt. This is what she called her trips from a conference, meeting, or training where she had intimacy with a man who was not her husband. The long drive back was used to deal with the guilt she felt after each such occasion. She hadn't been unfaithful on all her trips. She was careful. Stephanie flirted with men wherever the other employees in her office wanted to drink and dance. She needed a combination of good looks, being married, and therefore less likely to get in trouble, and, more importantly, a plan to meet him in a place that guaranteed as much privacy as possible. Condoms were a must, and she bought several for each trip, throwing away the unused ones before returning home. If an element was missing from the combination, she retired to her room alone. There were always more meetings, trainings, and conferences, usually 3. 4 a year. She never went beyond names. No exchange of phone numbers, no addresses, no detailed personal information, no follow-up meetings, anything to minimize the chances of being caught. Stephanie went over in her mind all the things she was about to lose. First, the love of her wonderful children, ages 10 and 13. They were smart, caring, athletic, and loving. They were typical kids for the most part, but both obeyed their parents and seemed to enjoy family time together. They seemed to love both their mother and father equally. If their parents had separated, it would have made them very sad. One would think that fear for their children's feelings would have made Stephanie less likely to commit adultery. Instead, the severity of the consequences of being caught increased the risk, and thus the titillating effect. The affair didn't have to make sense, it just had to be exciting. Second, she didn't want her husband to find out. She had a lot of guys in college, and she used their sexual prowess as an indicator of future dating. Some of them wanted a serious relationship, but she got bored easily. When her college career came to an end, she was desperate to find a husband. She was ready to settle down. Roger showed up. He was bright, caring, and perfectly at home in the bedroom. It was a matter of time and love for both of them. Their marriage was a success from every angle. There were few quarrels. They shared chores around the house. They planned a budget together and stuck to it. They agreed on when to have children, and they both shared most of the parenting responsibilities. Roger actually had to talk her into having children, but Stephanie was glad when she became a mother. When one had to go away or was sick, the other automatically took over the household duties without complaining. They were the best of friends. Stephanie and Roger enjoyed their sex life. Over the years, they had explored every kind of sexual activity except bondage and similar friction. Sharing or exchanging was not even discussed. They both seemed to believe in traditional marriage, or so it seemed. Stephanie hadn't shown interest in anything more until at one conference, one of her married female colleagues had a rather obvious affair with a man she'd met. Stephanie was curious and sworn to secrecy if her co-worker told her everything. Hearing about the titillating affair, the great sex, and the statement that the tryst would only affect her marriage in a positive way, if at all, Stephanie was hooked. Stephanie, however, waited to see what would happen to her marriage if lightning struck a woman to death. She began to separate her marriage from a possible affair. One didn't have to affect the other. After a couple years, nothing negative had happened with her coworker that Stephanie could notice. Now she began to actively plan. Careful planning. The first 2 times she met, when she had the chance, she hadn't seen fit to take the risk. The next time she met a guy who wasn't affiliated with the training, was married, good-looking, and had a private room. She was very excited and paranoid, but everything went according to plan. Stephanie enjoyed the sex, said goodbye to her man, and went home. Roger didn't seem to suspect a thing once she got home. For weeks, she worried that Roger would somehow find out about it, but that hadn't happened. It was as if the gods were blessing her actions. Since then, Stephanie had become more willing to hunt for an acceptable lover. However, she never went beyond the risky terms. More often than not, she went home without ever experiencing another man, but neither was she punished for watching and lusting. Stephanie worried about her co-workers. They were the ones who might notice something about her that would make them suspect a liaison. She tried to flirt on the same level during every adventure at the bar, regardless of whether or not she was going to be on the take that night. If she had to share a room with a coworker, she would flirt and have a drink on her own, then return to the room when her roommate left. There was no sex on these trips, but the perception among her coworkers was that she drank, flirted, and went to the room by herself even when she didn't have a roommate. She never asked for a single room. When she found herself in one, it happened. The thing she worried about most was Carol. She had been a whore, by her own admission, until she went through the conversion experience at the revival. Since then, she had decided to become the willing conscience of the women at work. She flagged any clothing she deemed too sexy or provocative. Women with naturally good figures were often the object of her criticism, although their husbands or boyfriends saw nothing wrong with it. Good bodies were usually visible regardless of clothing. If Carol went on one of her trips, Stephanie was on the lookout. If Carol went to bed before Stephanie did, Stephanie would bide her time for a while, and if it wasn't too late, she might go hunting. Usually, if Carol went out, Stephanie was left without her. Another problem was Joel. He was a co-worker, one of the few men in this social work office. He was definitely good-looking and had a reputation for having a big tool. He hit on all the eligible and supposedly inappropriate women at work. Joel viewed out-of-town meetings as a time to increase the number of notches on his belt. All things being equal, Stephanie would love to give him a taste. After a few drinks and no better prospects, Stephanie might have considered lowering her terms for the meeting and accepting one of Joel's many offers. But she'd never accepted. It was too risky. Stephanie saw the 73 miles to go sign on the park road. She shifted her thoughts to her last lover. One last erotic memory before she started thinking about home. As usual, the gang went to a bar where they could dance. Stephanie drank, danced, and looked out for prospects. This night there were two of them, and they sat together. After she danced with each of them, they invited her to their table for a drink. She accepted and noted the time. Being with strange men for too long might have piqued the curiosity of her co-workers. Tim and Jim looked interested as they all shared basic but not personal information. Stephanie began to wonder how she could separate one from the other or perhaps have her first threesome. Before she had to choose, Jim said he was heading to the room and wished them a good night. Tim looked a little surprised, but very grateful. After she stopped flirting, she challenged Tim, "Deal with it or shut up." Stephanie handed him a key card for the extra room and asked him to wait 20 minutes after she left her friends. She said, "Make sure there is no one in the hallway when you knock." Stephanie spent about 15 minutes with her co-workers, after which she and a few others decided to call it a night. 20 minutes later, Tim came to her door. Like most men she dated, he was in a big hurry. She slowed him down, controlling the speed at which he removed his clothes. Stephanie redirected his attempts at immediate sex before he realized it was foreplay or no play. Tim was quite large, but Stephanie was no size queen. She was glad she insisted on foreplay. Less than an hour later, she was in bed alone. Half an hour she spent cleaning up all the marks from the condom they had used. Standing in front of the full-length mirror, Stephanie looked for bite marks or hickey marks. Clear. Remembering the details of their session, Stephanie realized she was becoming aroused. It wasn't an unwanted situation, but potentially dangerous, depending on whether she met Roger when she returned home. Sometimes he wanted to get right down to business. Oh well, if she wasn't worried, she could tell Roger that she'd gotten excited at the thought of coming home to him. He'd want to believe it. Stephanie wondered if it was time to stop trying. She knew that the more there were, the more likely she was to make a mistake and get caught. Like any addict, she deluded herself that she could quit at any time, but only if necessary. She believed that her adventures didn't negatively affect her marriage and family because she wanted to believe it. The 23 miles to go sign meant it was time for her to readjust to her role as a faithful wife and devoted mother. She thought about the kids' sports schedules and what transportation would be needed. The kids would leave notes on the refrigerator if they needed something baked for school or if they were in charge of snacks at the next soccer game. Roger will need to be reminded to buy meat for cooking this weekend. It was easy for Stephanie to get carried away with makeup sex for Roger, who had been forced to miss her the last few days. Stephanie carried her suitcase up the porch steps and into the living room. Even though neither Roger's car nor the children were home, she made a phone call just in case. Receiving no answer, Stephanie rolled the suitcase into the laundry room. She quickly put the dirty clothes in the washing machine and started it up. She didn't want any residue left on the clothes, like the smell of cologne. She smiled at the thought of getting away with it again, and Roger would get all the benefits of her good mood today. Going upstairs, she moved her toiletries to her half of the bathroom. When the suitcase was empty, she put it away in the closet. She stopped and looked around the bedroom. Roger had made the bed, which was somewhat unusual. For some reason she couldn't pinpoint, it was somehow out of place. She headed for the children's rooms. To her surprise, their beds were made as well. Stephanie finally decided that her anxious feeling was just residual guilt and moved on to her plans for the evening. She was going to cook one of Roger's favorite dishes, which meant she would have to prepare a second course for the children to eat. Going down to the kitchen, she pulled out all the pots and pans she needed. Placing the first of them on the island, she saw this, and awed. There lay a piece of legal paper and Roger's wedding ring. She picked up the paper as if it were poisonous. In a way, it was. Roger's note said the children were staying with his parents. He was looking for an apartment that would be spacious enough for him and the children. She could expect to be served with a lawsuit in a few days. The note ended by saying that Jim was a fraternity brother and recognized Stephanie even from the scant information she provided about herself. Tim gave Jim a vivid description of Stephanie's actions in the bedroom. Roger would contact her for his attorney's contact information and arrange a time for him and the kids to pick up the clothes. Stephanie whined but didn't cry. She'd long ago made a plan of action in case this got out, but hadn't rehearsed it lately when she'd gotten away with it for so long. The first order of business was to talk to Roger in person. When she did, she would cry. Roger hated to hear her cry, sympathized, and usually gave in to her. She would tell him it was a one-time mistake. Menopause could be blamed for everything. She would apologize and vow never to do it again. Finally, she would use the children as leverage. Children need both parents, and going back and forth between parents would hurt their upbringing and stability. She pulled out a scotch and took a sip before launching into her attack. Roger's phone went to voicemail each time. She left tearful messages asking him to call her until his mailbox was full. When it was time to go to bed, she called his parents. She sobbed again and begged to talk to her babies. Roger's father told her, "Hell no." Stephanie was stunned, for she had never heard him say a harsh word. She tried to object that it was her legal right to talk to them. He replied that he had to see a legal warrant. She asked to speak to Roger. His father said he wasn't home. He was looking at apartments. Stephanie tried one last request. "Please tell my husband that we need to talk and that he shouldn't be spending money on an apartment when that money could go toward things for the kids." She figured it would get to Roger. It took a few days before Roger called her with his lawyer's contact information and asked when he could stop by to get new clothes for himself and the kids. Roger asked where she wanted to be served so as not to embarrass her. She took the opportunity to plead for a private conversation with him. After hearing her story, he would stop this divorce nonsense. Why would he want to separate his family for such a minor reason? All of this was said with sobs. Roger said he would stop by tomorrow and buy more clothes. After he got the clothes, he would have a chance to talk to her. She asked him to make dinner. He said coffee would be fine. As soon as he hung up, Stephanie's tears stopped. She felt she had a chance to turn things in her favor. She worked on her speech. Roger was silent as he gathered clothes from his and the children's bedrooms. After putting them in the car, he returned and sat down at the kitchen table where Stephanie was already drinking coffee, made just the way he liked it. Roger asked her to say one thing first. She agreed. "Do you already have a lawyer? If so, my lawyer should know who it is." "Roger, I haven't sought an attorney yet because I don't believe divorce would be the best solution for our children, you or me. Yes, I cheated. But why? I don't know. I guess I wasn't used to drinking as much as I thought I was. I really don't remember what happened. Maybe they put drugs in my drink. I'm not trying to say it's not my fault that I'm in this position. I'm just saying I was partly out of control because of alcohol and possibly drugs. Think of the kids. I believe I was a good mother. My one-time mistake doesn't hurt my ability to be a mother to them. Separation from their mother and father will hurt them emotionally. Having to pay rent, utilities, etc. For two families will cut into the money we could spend on them. It will hurt them. Do you really want to cause them more pain because of something that happened that has no meaning to them? Do you want them to see you take revenge on their mother? Are you sure that's what you want? I believe I was a good wife, at least until that night. My mistake damaged our marriage, and it's my fault. An event that happened once shouldn't be a permanent, recurring wound to our marriage. All you have to do is forgive me this time. Then you will see that it will never happen again, and all the wonderful things you thought about our marriage and our family before you found out from Jim will come back. I will do anything you ask to restore our marriage, but I won't do anything to make it even more broken than it is now." Stephanie thought her words would elicit the expected reaction from Roger. He pondered her words. She decided to go ahead with it. "You and the kids are moving back in. I'll stay in the guest room. Let us remain mother and father while I prove to you that I am worthy of us being husband and wife again." Her monologue probably won Roger over. If only she had kept her mouth shut. "Roger, please believe me, they mean nothing to me. I love only you." Roger picked up on that immediately. "They? Have you had other men you've slept with? You're pathetic. Bitch. I was going to be nice to you in the divorce, but that's in the past." He stepped out. Stephanie whispered weakly, "I just blabbed too much. I meant that he doesn't mean anything to me." This time the tears were real. For the first time, she felt guilty. It was the last time Stephanie would see her family. When Roger went to his lawyer to see how badly he could treat Stephanie in the divorce, he was hit with the reality that no matter what she did, she would get the kids, the house, alimony, child support, and housekeeping, plus 50% of their joint assets. She was going to be rewarded for screwing things up. Unless Roger, the kids, and all the money he could muster went to parts unknown. He took his guilt upon himself. However, he felt guilty because he couldn't punish her any more than he had punished her. Margot Chambers loved and adored her husband. Bruce was everything she wanted in a man, with his barrel chest and strong jaw, running his construction company like a king. No one messed with Bruce Chambers. Even nearly 20 years later, Margot was proud to bear his name. He was a fantastic lover, a wonderful father to their 2 children, a patient man with her son from her first marriage, who had been living separately with his father for the past few years. Although the frequency of their sex life had decreased somewhat over the years, the quality of it hadn't changed. Bruce was as assertive, passionate, and fearless as he had been when they first met, and Margot loved being his wife. So when Margot answered the phone one afternoon and heard a woman crying on the phone, her first reaction was bewilderment. There was no way it could be Carol, the office manager of Bruce's company, the most serious and reserved woman Margot had ever known. And what she was saying between sobs was also impossible. Bruce was a trim man of 55. He worked out at their basement gym and went jogging almost every night. A man like that wouldn't just faint. Even if he did, he would be in an ambulance somewhere, rushed to a hospital where he would fight for his life and win. This is Bruce Chambers we're talking about. He has never lost a fight in his life. But when the phone was handed over and Margot heard the somber, calm voice of Bruce's business partner, Ray, it all became real. Bruce had collapsed in his office and died before the ambulance even got there. Heart failure, they said. If Margot wanted to see her husband, she'd have to go to the hospital morgue. Margot finished talking, dropped to her knees, and howled in pain like a mother bear in a snare. Everyone had been so kind. Her family, her friends, everyone Bruce worked with, all of them had shown more love and support than Margot could have hoped for. Even her first husband, Jim, had called her to offer his condolences. They had a pleasant half-hour conversation during which he promised to talk to Lucas. Their son was 23 years old, and he hadn't spoken to Margot in 5 years. Perhaps this could be the first step toward reconciliation. Bruce's parents were alive, and he had a sister. Of course, they were all devastated, but the funeral expenses were shared with Margot. The service was held in a huge church and was well attended. Bruce was popular, a pillar of the community. As Margot sat in the front row and watched 17-year-old Jerry and 14-year-old Tom stand up and give eulogies in honor of their father, she was proud of them. Both Jim and Lucas appeared, dressed in dark, neat clothes rather than the strict black suits and ties most men wore. Father and son had intended to sit in the very back row of the church, but Margot's parents wouldn't hear of it. Margot felt a pang of jealousy as Lucas hugged his grandparents. She collapsed onto her late husband's casket, and she wanted Bruce's strong arms around her. The whole mess with Lucas never seemed so awful when a big, strong man cradled her against his big, strong chest. After the funeral, people came up to the next of kin to offer their condolences. Margot tried to focus on the people who approached her, but her heart was racing. Jim and Lucas joined the line of sympathizers, and in less than a minute she was actually looking into the eyes of her oldest child. A child? Margot had been 24 when she'd given birth to Lucas, only a year older than he was now. She'd heard his voice when he talked to his half-brother and sister, and here he was, a young man in a neat dark shirt and jacket, looking at the 47-year-old woman he used to call Mom. She could still see the rage in his eyes, but he was clearly determined to respect the situation. Margot was very proud of him, but she had the good sense not to say it out loud. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I'm so glad to see you." She was sincere. Indeed, it was so obvious that she meant it that both parties were a little puzzled. Lucas swallowed and looked at the brooch holding her neckerchief in place. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said. He nodded dryly and walked away. Margot turned her head and watched him walk across the grass between the headstones. Jim walked over and stood beside her, following her gaze. Margot cleared her throat. "Perhaps we can chat later?" she asked. Of course, Jim said. But when the gathering moved on to the wake at Margot and Bruce's luxurious home, Jim and Lucas were no longer in sight. For the headstone, Margot had chosen a classic vertical rectangle of polished granite, sturdy and uncomplicated. It seemed right for Bruce. Along with his name and dates, it was carved with the inscription, "A fearless husband and loving father." He would have loved it. Margot visited the grave almost every day. Her sense of emptiness was almost constantly felt in her chest, so the still stone block was a comfort. It reminded her of the need to be fearless herself. She had 2 children approaching adulthood, and they needed her to be strong. Her friends told her she was an attractive woman, but Margot couldn't even think of anyone else right now. Bruce had taken out a life insurance policy, typical of him to think of such things, and she had also inherited his share of the construction company. Still, Margot wasn't ready to think about that, so she focused on being careful with the money she had. One late October afternoon, some 6 months later, Margot was walking through the churchyard on her daily visit, when something made her stop like a dug-in on the path. At Bruce's grave was a woman squatting in front of the headstone, the way someone might squat in front of a baby. Margot could only see her from behind, but her long, black, slightly curly hair and stylish clothes gave her an immediate sense of feminine appeal. The woman was resting her hand on a granite stone, and Margot felt like yelling at her to stop touching it. The woman straightened up. She was petite, but she stood tall, her black-heeled boots visible from beneath the hem of her long, honey-brown coat. She kissed her fingers and moved the kiss to the top of the headstone. After waiting a moment, she turned to leave. Margot felt her throat constrict. She guessed the woman was attractive, but she hadn't been prepared for how beautiful the young woman's face was. She had dark eyes and lashes, slightly coarse eyebrows, and there was liveliness in her expression, as if she found the world wonderful and attractive. The woman was heading for the churchyard gate, which meant she had to pass Margot. Their eyes met for a moment, and the black-haired woman nodded politely to Margot, about to step around her. Margot glared back fiercely. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman stopped like a dummy. "I beg your pardon?" I said, "Who are you? It's none of your damn business who I am." "My husband's grave is over there, so I think it's my business." The woman blinked. Then her face broke into a wide, surprised smile. "Oh my God, you're Margot!" Margot stepped back as if the woman had hit her. The woman whined and shook her head. Then the smile returned, a little shyly, and she looked at Margot with a kind of warmth, as if they were comrades who had been swindled by the same crook. Margot did not smile back. "I asked you a question." "Yes, I see," said the woman. "And if you are Margot, I will gladly answer it. But before I do, I have a question for you." The young woman straightened up and looked Margot in the eye. "Do you really want to know who I am?" Margot suddenly felt a bad feeling. The cold feeling that had just rumbled through her stomach was telling her that she wasn't going to like what this woman had to say. What made it worse was that the warning was probably genuine. Margot knew from experience how hard it was to brush off painful things unless the person telling you was motivated by malice. But if this woman walked away without telling her anything, Margot would always wonder who she was, or rather, who she was, to Bruce. Margot guessed that Bruce had probably slept with this woman, but what else was there? And how often? It was probably better to know for sure than to let her imagination play out. "Tell me," softly. "All right," the woman said. "I've warned you." The woman straightened up. Margot pulled herself together. "I'm a sex worker, and Bruce was my client." "My husband did not go to a sex worker. As a matter of fact, he didn't, but I had him." "I don't believe you." "Oh, that's fine. No problem." The woman turned to leave. Margot was out of her mind. "Why would he go to a sex worker?" she exclaimed. "Look, Margot, can I call you Margot? What should I call you?" "You can call me Faya." "Is that your professional name?" "It's the name Bruce knew me by." Faya looked at the tombstone with a pensive expression on her face. "He never knew my real name." Margot stared at the woman, trying to figure out what this illicit relationship might have been. There was clearly more to it than money, despite what Faya had said, unless prostitutes made a habit of visiting their clients' graves. "How did you find him?" Margot asked. "I hadn't seen him for months," said Faya. "It was normal. Then one night I got bored, so I Googled him. That's when I came across the obituary. It's unfortunate. He was a special person." "Why was he special to you?" "Oh, it's a long story." Faye seemed to have an idea. She looked at Margot, sizing her up. "I charge $300 an hour if you're interested in hearing more." "I'm not going to pay you for a story. Don't you think I have a right to know?" "Honestly, no." Faya gave her a charming smile. "I'm going to have lunch at that little tea house I saw on the way, and if I don't see you again, I wish you a pleasant life." Faya started down the path. She had an easy, swaggering gait that annoyed Margot to no end. Margot had always thought she and Bruce had had an exceptionally good sex life, and the thought that he might not have felt the same was a terrible blow. But what could have been missing? Margot was ready for anything, any kinky thing they could imagine. Bruce always said how lucky he was to be married to such a sexually adventurous woman. Okay, Faye was younger, but that couldn't be the reason, could it? Margot walked over to Bruce's headstone. In her mind, the inscription now read, "A treacherous bastard and a lying cheat." "What the fuck, Bruce?" she shouted to the granite rectangle. "What the hell? What the fuck, really?" Faye sat at a small, round table covered with a white lace tablecloth and looked out the window, framed by frilly floral curtains. She had just finished a surprisingly tasty Caesar salad and was wiping the corner of her mouth with a napkin when a lush-breasted Margot burst into the tiny establishment. The bell above the store door rang like an alarm, but Faya smiled and beckoned her in. Margot walked past the other customers to a table by the window, her face darkening. "Please have a seat," Faya said, pointing to a vacant chair. Margot plumped into the chair, placing her bag on her lap. She looked furious. "I suppose you want cash?" she asked angrily. "I'm afraid so. My purse is a little small for a credit card machine." Margot held out freshly rolled-up bills from the ATM across the table. Faya took the money and slipped it into her purse without checking it. The waitress, an older woman and owner of the tea shop, came over to put the dishes away. Faya gave her a dazzling smile and ordered tea for two. Watching her, Margot could clearly sense that Faya was enjoying herself. "So," said Faya as the waitress left, "where would you like to start?" "How did you first meet Bruce?" "I used to work at a gentleman's club. There was a bar and a small dance floor and private rooms that could be rented by the hour. Myself and the other girls would chat up the men, talk them into buying us drinks, and, if they were in the mood, take them upstairs for special favors." "Sounds charming," with a smirk. "Not a word I would have used. But the club was clean, shiny, and very expensive. I was making good money. A waitress came over with a tray with a full tea set on it. There was a small round teapot with matching cups and saucers, and a matching milk pot and sugar bowl. On a tiny matching mini saucer were 4 chocolates. Faya looked at the ensemble and flashed one of her dazzling smiles. "Now that's what I call charm!" The waitress smiled as she rearranged the tea items on the table. "You have a lovely place," Faya said. "And the salad was excellent." "Well, thank you." The old woman turned pink, almost bowed, and left. Faya poured 2 cups of tea while Margot watched from under half-closed eyelids. "Speaking of charm," she said, "you're quite good at it." "Thank you, Margot." "Was this part of the club training?" "In a way," Faya replied coldly. "Part of my job is to make men feel good about themselves. It's like the opposite of being a wife." Margot bristled. "I've been nice to Bruce." "Really? What's that supposed to mean?" "Listen, Margot," Faya said. "Whenever I asked your husband why he married you, he always talked about how beautiful you were and how great the sex was. It was very important to him how great the sex was." "And yet he paid to have sex with you?" "Not really." Faye sighed and took a sip of her tea, raising her pinky finger. "Look, technically, yes. He'd sign me up for 2 hours, we'd get naked and have sex. But that was mostly at my insistence. I don't like taking money from a man and then not keeping my end of the bargain. And of those 2 hours, maybe 10 to 15 minutes were spent in sexual activity. Mostly we lay naked with each other and talked." "About what?" "You. About business, about how hard it was for him to be a man, never showing weakness, never showing fear, always giving the impression that he was on top of things. "But he was always like that," Margot protested. "He was exactly that kind of man." "Margot, do you really believe there's such a thing as that kind of man? Only a psychopath is never afraid of anything." "I'm sure of it." Well, Bruce didn't think there was. He realized that if he ever told you the truth about his fears and insecurities, you would lose your sex drive and leave him for another man. Why would he think that? Because that's what you did to your first husband. Margot turned pale. My God, how many secrets, personal details had Bruce shared with this woman? The cup of tea stood in front of her, untouched, cooling. "Look, I'm not saying this to judge you," Faye said. "I'm just saying that Bruce saw how you treated your first husband, so he was determined not to make the same mistakes again. He even said once, 'When Margot talks about her ex, it's like she's giving me a blueprint of what not to do.' You shouldn't talk about what's bothering you. Don't share how you really feel about something, and absolutely don't talk about thoughts that might include cutting back on spending. Problems with making money. Because that's what your first husband did. And Bruce told me that you never stopped marveling at what a relief it was for you to be with a real man who didn't put out crap like that." Faye smiled at her and filled her cup from the teapot again, as if they were talking about the price of eggs. Margot's jaw clenched. She looked out the tea-house window and shook her head. "That's not fair," she said. "You can't compare the two men. Bruce was a real man, whereas Jim... Look, Jim is a good man, but he doesn't know how to be a man. He just wasn't fit to be a husband." "Yeah, Bruce knew that's how you saw it," Faye said. "That you didn't want him as he is. You wanted a fearless husband." "That's not true. I told Bruce many, many times that I wanted him to be himself more than anything." "Yeah, but that's what you told your first husband. And when he took you at your word and opened up, you told him he wasn't man enough and you left him. So when you said to Bruce, 'I want you to be yourself,' he took it to mean, 'I want you to be the kind of husband I want you to be.'" That's a lie. He has fearless husband written on his tombstone. What more proof do you need? Margot jumped to her feet, pounding the table and nearly knocking over the cups. She was pale, her nostrils flared, and she stared intently at the other woman. But even as her rage overwhelmed her, when she spoke, there was desperation in her voice. "You didn't know Bruce! You didn't know Bruce!" "No, you didn't know Bruce," Faya said calmly. "And you weren't interested in meeting him. What you wanted was a perfect marriage, and if Bruce didn't give it to you, you would have left him for a man who would." "What do you know about marriage?" "You're a whore." Faye jumped to her feet. "No, you're the whore!" she screamed. "You're the one who cheated on your first husband and then made both men lie to the child about it. You took the little baby away from his father when Bruce moved in with you and then filed a false child abuse report to get away from your ex." Margot's eyes bulged with horror. "Yes, he told me about it," Faya said fiercely. "It was the first time we met. Bruce showed up at the club drunk, broken, and self-destructive. He had just found out what you had done, so he was going to have a dozen prostitutes and ruin his marriage. Ironically, I was the one who talked him out of it." "Why should I believe that?" "I don't care if you believe it or not. But my own parents are divorced, so when I heard there were 3 children in the emotional cesspool you created, I thought I should at least try to help save the marriage." Faya grabbed her coat, put it on, and grabbed her purse. A waitress came over and stood nervously nearby, clearly wanting to intervene in the altercation, but not quite sure how to do so. Faye threw her an apologetic look and put $50 on the table, almost double what was owed. Then, frowning, she pulled out the remaining bills and tossed them to the side of Margot's desk. "Here," Faya said. "Your payment." Faya turned and walked away. The bell on the door jingled as she opened it, and there was an awkward silence after it closed. Margot hadn't visited Bruce's grave in over a week. When she finally forced herself to go, she was surprised at how plain the headstone looked. Gray, nameless, nothing special. The phrase, "fearless husband," now seemed like a bad joke, and there was a streak of white bird shit running through his last name. Margot had a pack of baby wipes in her bag just for such an occasion, but she didn't bother this time. Let the rain wash it off. She left the churchyard and walked across town, trying to deal with her emotions. She was very, very angry, and as she walked through the market square, she realized that the reason for her anger was that she felt like a failure. She had married Jim, thinking he was a real man, only to find out that there was nothing extraordinary about him. Then she met Bruce, went and did exactly the same thing. Margot remembered how Bruce's company had been under investigation by the fraud department a few years earlier. It had turned out to be the result of malicious rumors started by a competitor, and Bruce had sued their collective asses. But while it was still going on, it was a serious concern because even the possibility of a scandal could ruin them. Ray, Bruce's partner, had lost a lot of weight and looked like warmed-up death, with circles under his eyes and prematurely graying hair. Bruce, while troubled, maintained his confident demeanor, his positive attitude, and continued to pay a lot of attention to his wife. In a world full of scary people like Ray and Jim, Margot felt happy around a real man like Bruce. But now it turned out that Bruce was no different, that he was just as afraid of financial ruin as Ray was, and just as afraid of losing his children as Jim was. The only difference was that Bruce had managed to hide it. And Margot now remembered how many evening meetings Bruce had at that time, sometimes even on weekends. She felt cheated. Instead of dealing with his fears like a man, he'd run off to this little pint-sized slut. Margot realized that it wasn't the mental image of Bruce having Faye that bothered her so much. That would at least show some masculinity. No, it was the image of Bruce curled up on the bed, resting his head on the girl's lap, sobbing with fear as she stroked his hair and said, "Here we go, here we go. Everything will be all right." Margot returned home and went straight upstairs to the bedroom. She started taking Bruce's clothes out of the closet and throwing them on the bed. She hadn't decided yet whether to sell or give them away to charity stores. But for now, she would roll everything up and put it in the spare room. When the kids got home, they could probably browse, just in case they wanted something as a keepsake. It took Margot less than an hour to get her late husband's things out of her living room and into the spare room. Then she made herself a cup of tea and turned on her computer. A friend had sent links to a couple of dating sites aimed at Margot's age group, plus another for dating potential cougars and boy toys. Margot decided to put together a profile for all the sites. She was an attractive woman in her 40s and thought she could expect to make a decent acquaintance. Besides, she had to give herself a chance to be with a real man for a change. There had to be some, didn't there? "Thank you, sir, for agreeing to do this interview." The young reporter began kissing my butt. "Since you are retiring as CEO of one of the region's largest employers, our newspaper wants to feature you in an article in Sunday's edition." "I understand that. I'm just afraid your readers won't have anything to be interested in," I replied. "We are successful because we produce a superior product at a competitive price. I really don't think this is a corporate secret. Most successful companies follow this formula." "What I was looking for was human interest, sir," the guy replied. "I want to know things like how long it took you to get to the top of the company. Were you ever discouraged? How long have you been with Norris Enterprises? Have you started at the bottom and worked your way up through the ranks? Was there some turning point in your career that you can point to as the day you realized you were going to be the leader of the company, or did it happen gradually?" The visionary guy asked the question. "You're serious, aren't you? I think you are too young to remember the business climate in 2009. It was a very difficult period, as you may have read in some history books. You may think that 10 years ago, dinosaurs walked the planet," I reflected. "You will learn that time has a way of slipping away. In fact, I vividly remember the day I realized I was destined to succeed in this company, as if it were yesterday, not 10 years ago. The story will not be what you expect, so just sit back and I'll try to reconstruct the events as I remember them." "You have a few minutes, don't you?" I asked, leaning back in my chair and reflecting on that spring day so long ago. I was awakened by the ringing of my cell phone. By the time I found the spot where I had dropped my pants on the floor the night before, the ringing had already stopped. A quick glance at the cell phone showed that I had missed 7 calls. I fell asleep after Jay Leno's monologue, host of the late-night show. The clock on the nightstand showed that it was now just a few minutes after 6 in the morning. Something must have happened to get so many calls between midnight and 6 in the morning. The last call was from my boss's home phone. I dialed the number and waited for an answer. "Hello, Frank," an excited Marge Larson answered. "I'm glad you called back. There's hell waiting for you here. You'd better get home as soon as possible. My husband, your wife, and your wife's brother-in-law are in the hospital. They'll be fine, so don't worry about them too much, but you need to get back here and help me clean up all the crap that came through the proverbial fan." "What the hell are you talking about, Marge?" I demanded an answer. "Why are there so many people in the hospital? Was it an accident or an explosion? What happened?" "I so wish the reason was so mundane, Frank. I have to go to the hospital, then visit my lawyer, and finally get to the plant and find out what the hell is going on. I wish I'd been paying more attention to business lately." "Roberta knows the situation well enough, Marge. Let her handle the business while you focus on more pressing matters," I suggested while my mind tried to put the information Marge had revealed to me in order. Yes, Roberta. I forgot to mention that she's in jail. I gotta go, Frank. Try to get your ass back here as soon as possible. I need you here." Marge urged me to end the conversation. I pulled out of the motel and pointed the car north on Route 81. As I drove, I tried to make a few phone calls to find out what was going on at home. My wife and sister-in-law did not answer the phone. My wife's parents reported nothing except that my wife and their other son-in-law were in the hospital. Both of my children lived in Washington, D.C., and knew no more than I did, if at all. I returned to my hometown almost 3 hours later with no more information about the situation. I entered the hospital at 9 in the morning and went straight to the front desk. I soon learned that my wife had suffered a broken nose and a concussion. She was now under observation, whatever that meant. She smiled weakly as I was escorted into her room. "Frank, this is all a huge mistake, darling. You have to believe me," she began. "Well, this is really good news, Tessa," I replied sarcastically. "I think the rainbow circles on your face and the fact that you were unconscious for half an hour or so just fooled the medical staff. They mistakenly thought something was wrong with you. If it's a mistake, we can get a big settlement for negligence. Let's go home." "No, Frank, it wasn't a mistake. I have a concussion and a broken nose. I'll have to have surgery when the swelling goes down." "The mistake was what happened to Jeff," she said, and then slowly added, "and Jack." "That explains it so well, Tessa," I admitted. "You're totally screwed because of a mistake, as you put it, involving my boss and your sister's husband. Can you anticipate all the questions I might have, answer them, and keep us from doing it the hard way?" "I can anticipate some of the things you might wonder about, Frank, but I'm still recovering from a concussion, and I don't think it would be a good idea to say too much right now. I'll feel better soon, and then we can talk things over, okay?" "I can see that all that time at the law firm is paying off, Tessa," I snapped back. "You just rest. And while you're resting, maybe you can come up with some story that will explain everything to my satisfaction and maybe show that you're the helpless victim of some conspiracy." I was too angry to stay in the same room with my wife. I'd already learned that she, my boss, and her sister's husband had been taken from my house by ambulance the previous evening. Add to that the fact that my immediate boss at work, Roberta, had been arrested and taken to jail at the same time and also from my house, and it gave me a sense of anxiety and worry that I couldn't shake off. Am I being paranoid for worrying about such trivial things? And then she tells me she's too weak to tell me what the hell was going on last night at my house? As I was walking out of the hospital into the lobby, I was stopped by a man in a suit. He handed me some kind of ID with a bunch of fine print that I couldn't read without my glasses. Despite being a bit far-sighted, I could easily tell this guy was some kind of police officer. Things were getting more interesting by the minute. "Mr. Barker?" He began his interrogation. "Can I ask you a few questions? You have a little time, don't you? You can't take your wife home for a few more hours, can you?" "By almost any definition, you just did," I replied with irritation. "Is that it? Or is there more to it?" He stared at me for a few seconds, mulling over my abrupt answer. Finally, he shrugged and continued. I'm trying to piece together what happened last night at your house. There are several versions of events, but they all point to you being the central force in this perfect storm. Where were you last night? I was in Harrisburg. I met with a client and then had dinner with him. I'm staying at the Motel 8 near Hershey, and I left this morning just after 6 o'clock this morning. I was sent there on orders from my boss, Jack Larson, through my immediate supervisor, Roberta Peters. Since they were two of the clusterfucks you've already interrogated, you should have known that, unless, of course, they were in a truthful mood, I added sarcastically. They both told me you were sent to Harrisburg, the detective admitted. It's a little more complicated than that. Miss Peters said you called from Harrisburg and asked for a package to be delivered to your home last night. Her complicity was a direct result of her responding to your request. That is utter nonsense, I stated categorically. I didn't call her, I didn't talk to her, and I didn't know that she came to my house for any reason. I called my boss's house last night and spoke to Mrs. Larson. I asked her to let me talk to her husband, but she told me he was out of town. He had gone fishing in upstate New York and would be back late the next evening. Mrs. Larson asked me if this was important. Since her family actually owns the business, I didn't see fit to keep her in the dark about anything, so I explained my dilemma. I had bought an expensive pearl necklace for my wife's birthday and foolishly left it in the desk in my office. It bothered me both that I had left it there and that my wife wouldn't get it for her birthday, which was today. I told Marge that I was going to ask Jack, my boss, if he could drop the present off at my house. My wife was going to leave to visit her elderly grandmother in a nursing home in New Jersey. She was going to stay at a motel nearby and return home this morning. I was hoping the necklace would be at the house so I could call her and ask her to try it on. Then she'll praise me for being a very caring and loving husband, even if I have to be away on business on her birthday, I reasoned. Miss Peters pretty much told me the same version, only she claims that you knew Mrs. Larson would call her and ask her to do this assignment because her husband was out of state fishing. She claims you set her up, the detective finished. Set her up for what? I demanded an answer. I called my boss to ask him to do me a personal favor. I had no idea Roberta would be involved. I still have no idea what the hell happened. Why are you asking me these questions? Why is she under arrest? What the hell happened in my house last night? Did you ask Jeff Rogers to go to your house to let Miss Peters in? The flatfoot cop continued, proving he has the temperament and brains of a bulldog. Where the hell do you get this shit from? I asked in bewilderment. I called my wife's sister June and told her she might get a call from my boss. That was before I talked to his wife and found out he was out of town. I asked her if she could drive over with the spare key to our house that she kept, meet my boss there, and let him in. It was a pretty simple request. Looks like it, said the bloody idiot, a detective who looked more like Charlie Chan's number 2 son than a modern policeman. Maybe you can tell me what the hell is going on. How did my wife or any of these other clusterfuckers end up in the hospital? Why was Roberta arrested? Who was kicked off American Idol this week? I demanded. All I can tell you at this point is that Lil Rounds is fried, admitted the departing lawman, heading for the fresh box of donuts the patrolman had just delivered. Son of a bitch, I growled back at the detective. I thought she was going to win this whole case. I couldn't think of anything else to do, so I headed home. I was terribly angry at my wife for using her evasive lawyer language when I asked her what had happened. I didn't much care for Jeff, my former brother-in-law, and my douchey boss, Jack. The former had been a pain in my ass ever since my sister-in-law brought his sorry ass home from college about 15 years ago. He was a sophomore guard on a Penn State team that nearly lost in the Orange Bowl. Somehow that elevated him to hero status in that orphanage my wife called her family home. The fact that he never finished university and couldn't get a steady job didn't matter. He was a fucking Nittany lion. My boss was another asshole. I repeatedly demonstrated my knowledge of the business and my value to the company. Without bragging, I knew more about Norris Enterprises than he and Roberta combined. The only downside to my employment record was that I was a man. So Jack, my jerk boss, promoted Roberta to me. This was based on her only quality. She entertained like a mink. I suppose it was an affirmative action since she never told him. No. Now Roberta was in jail and the other suspects were in the hospital. I was unable to find out the cause other than Tessa had a concussion and a broken nose. The extent or causes of the other two's injuries were somehow a secret. I didn't even know why Roberta had been arrested. The idea that they were somehow blaming it on me was ridiculous. The house looked like a bomb had gone off in it. The front door was broken out and pinned shut with some crooked nails. I walked over to the door to the kitchen and stepped inside. The first thing I noticed was a trail of blood coming down the stairs. Walking down it, I found more blood on my leather couch. It was similar in consistency to liver and was a very bright crimson color. I decided, fuck it, and walked up the stairs, trying not to step on the blood trail. It became almost impossible when I entered my bedroom. Blood was everywhere. It covered the floor and the bed, was splattered haphazardly on the walls and furniture. And then I saw a wrapped box containing a pearl necklace in the corner of the room by the closet. I quickly picked it up and opened it. I determined that the necklace was intact and undamaged. I slipped it into my pocket. I studied the scene of the massacre but couldn't make sense of it, either in my head or in the tales of the mess. I realized I should have watched more crime shows and less reality TV. I left the house as I found it and headed for the office. Tessa had been involved in the appearance of the blood, so she could have cleaned it up or arranged for it to be cleaned up. I had a bad feeling about the whole situation. There was less blood in the damn OK Corral than there was in my bedroom. Things like this rarely happened when I was sitting in bed reading a novel. Marge was in the office when I arrived. It was obvious that the state of anxiety was elevated. I guess when your superiors are hospitalized or imprisoned, it creates a certain amount of tension. "Frank!" Marge Larson called out from her husband's office, inviting me to join her. "I'm glad you're back so soon. Were you at the hospital?" "Actually, yes, Marge," I admitted, entering the room and closing the door. "My wife bullied me for a couple minutes, and then some genius from the police department questioned me." "Did you tell him anything?" Marge asked. Now I was really feeling out of my depth. "What kind of question was that? What the hell could I have told him?" "Yes, Marge. I told him where to find Jimmy Hoffa, Elvis, and Sasquatch. I didn't mean to, but the guy was so smart, he got it all out of me. What the hell can I tell him if I have no idea what the hell is going on?" I protested vehemently. "How did you explain that your brother-in-law was at your house? You told me your wife's sister would be there to let me in. I relayed that information to Roberta. How did you get Jeff to come to your house instead of June? It was a stroke of genius," she laughed. "Have you ever participated in a conversation when you have no idea what's going on? You understand every word that is being used, but altogether they don't seem to make any sense? Then you wonder if maybe you have brain damage or are in a stupor. I felt exactly the same way." "What the hell are you talking about, Marge?" I asked into the void. Marge stared at me for a few seconds and then seemed to suddenly make a brilliant observation. "My God, Frank, you didn't know anything, did you?" a puzzled Marge asked rhetorically. "You really wanted Tessa to get that present for her birthday. You didn't know about Jeff and had no idea that he was the one who let Roberta into your house. This is priceless." "I seem to be in the dark, Marge, but I expect you to bring me up to speed and pretty darn quickly. These stupid references to something and incomprehensible statements just piss me off. Tell me what the hell is going on. I don't have a lot of time. I told the hospital I'd be back at 1 o'clock to pick up Tessa and bring her home. Just lay it all out and tell me in plain English so I understand." "Let me start by saying that you really don't want to take Tessa home. She has a broken nose and a concussion because Jeff punched her in the face," Marge said. "Don't turn this into a game, Marge," I warned. "You can guess that I want to know why he hit her and why I shouldn't take her." Jeff hit her in a fit of jealousy when he saw her riding my husband cowboy style. It was more than he could handle, so he hit her hard and then started hitting Jack. He did a hell of a job on him, not to mention breaking his jaw and knocking out almost all of his teeth. Tessa was riding Jack. Jeff got mad and jumped Jack for me. We were never that close, but I had him to thank for that. Wow, that's a lot to swallow at once, Marge. Jack and Tessa were playing hide the sausage. Jeff caught them and spanked Jack for me. I owe that jerk a lot. I'm ashamed of all the times I made fun of him, I admitted. No, Frank, you're not, Marge exclaimed. Jeff beat up Jack because he was jealous. He'd had your wife for years and was furious when he found out she'd been unfaithful to him. I staggered and slumped back in my chair. Jeff and Jack were both sleeping with Tessa? How could I have missed that? It was obvious that if Marge was right, I wasn't going to be in a hurry to get Tessa out of the hospital. Why was Jeff himself hospitalized? Let me see if I got this right, Marge. Jeff came to my house to tell Roberta about my gift for Tessa. He and Roberta assumed that Tessa and Jack were out of town and the house would be empty. They somehow caught Tessa riding Jack. Jeff screwed Tessa because he thought she was his exclusive whore. Then he worked Jack over for having his girl. Are we sure now? I asked. I think you've got it right now, Frank, Marge agreed. One little problem. Boss lady number 1 forgot that Jeff's in the hospital, too. You think Jeff beat himself unconscious, even though it didn't take much at all? I added in my best Charlie Chan imitation, which wasn't very good. Marge actually grinned as she replied, Roberta stabbed Jeff in the femoral artery. He was bleeding like a hunted hog. The police arrived just as she shot him and ended up breaking down your front door. By then, Jeff was dragging his ass down the stairs and was covered in blood, shitting all over your leather couch. I see, I replied, unable to think of anything more witty. Are you going to tell me that Tessa played with Roberta, too? That's so wrong. No, not Tessa, Marge explained. Roberta and Jack had been belly-bumping for about a year now. When she saw Jeff give her boss and lover such a thorough ass-kicking, she pulled a gun out of her coat pocket and shot Jeff. She was arrested for multiple firearms violations and for shooting the asshole. It seems to me, Marge, that you are very well informed about this whole fiasco. Were you under the bed at the same time? Nothing would surprise me now. Hardly, Marge grinned. I had a frequent detective following Jack around for the last few weeks. He was outside your house listening through a device he had hidden in Jack's pants. He was the one who called the cops when he heard Jeff going crazy. If you had someone watching Jack, you had to know that he was already at my house and sleeping with Tessa when you sent Roberta there to deliver the necklace. Did it ever occur to you that there might be a problem? Hell, Roberta never hid the fact that she had a gun. Everybody knew about it, I practically yelled at Marge. Actually, Frank, it did occur to me that this Annie Oakley might pull out her old pig's foot and do some frontier justice, Marge smiled. I just didn't expect your brother-in-law to be there. I didn't realize he had Tessa, too. I thought June would let Roberta in and be a reliable witness to what was going on. Damn it, Marge. Tessa and Jack could have been shot by Roberta, I noted excitedly. Did you ever think of that? Well, of course I did. I knew it was possible. I thought you knew everything and were trying to set me up to catch Jack and Tessa. I just set Roberta up to, as they say, protect the innocent. The fact that Jeff, who let Roberta in, was also Tessa's lover and proceeded to beat the crap out of both of them was just the savory gravy. I thought you planned that one somehow, too. Well, now Jack and Roberta are out of business and you have a company to run. Marge, hadn't you thought of that, or were you so out for revenge that you were willing to destroy the company your father had built from scratch? I demanded an answer. Again, Frank, I thought about it. You and I both know you're more oblivious than those two idiots will ever know about running this company. I thought you might like Jack's position and his office, with double the salary, and you'll also get a first-class girl that Jack will never be allowed to serve again, if you heard me right, Marge cooed. I almost blew it when I stupidly asked, Do you mean Roberta or Tessa?